Hi, my name is Bianca Bird, and something that I realized about myself is that I enjoy giving advice. I find myself often talking to my friends or family members, and they come to me with just these questions, and I try my best to answer them. And I find joy in helping people like that. But something that I realized is that, first of all, I'm a student, I'm in my early 20s, and I realized that I do not know everything. So, I've done a lot of research and I've been networking a lot. I found myself on LinkedIn like every week, just talking to people and networking with them, just trying to learn from them. And from that experience, I just realized I don't know, there's so much that I don't know. And so, who am I to try to give my perspective when I don't know? So instead, I decided to document my findings, document what I'm learning from these professionals and these conversations that I'm having. So today I spoke with the amazing associate producer, John, who works at ESPN. Um, on the ESPN PR page, he goes behind the scenes to speak with people who work at ESPN to learn more about what they do and why they do it, which is why I decided to do a deep dive on John to discover who he is and how he got to where he is now. And I hope this helps you guys out there too.
So currently, I just got back from Seattle last week. I was doing uh, a day in the a weekend in the life of play-by-play and Sports Center host Steve Levy, and he was calling the first ever Seattle Kraken home game, and and it was historic because Seattle just became the 32nd NHL team, and he was calling the first play-by-play. So he was, it was cool to see him do that. Also, being a brand new stadium that literally just opened the night like of the game, so it was kind of cool. And then he went on to do Monday Night Football in Seattle. So it was like a double-header weekend for him, and it was awesome because we got to it was long days, but for the most part, we put together. I was able to put together and produce a story in a way that people really love. So it took around, I think, about a total of about 10 days to complete. The shooting took about 4, and then the editing took about 6. So I'm glad. A large part of me is glad that's over because it was a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. That was actually one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about because I went through ESPN PR, the YouTube page, and I just wanted to say that especially your the interview that you did with Crystal Plaka and Gus Coletti, I really enjoyed them. I thought they were amazing. So I wanted to thank you for
Oh,
putting in
thank
the
you.
work to do those things. And so that's one of my questions was like, where did that idea come from? Going behind the scenes of people who work there.
So it's been like a passion project for me for about quite a few years, and I tried to do it in several ways. And some, I won't say those ways weren't successful, because truth be told, any way to tell a story that is creative is successful, but in your mind you have it being told a different way, and eventually your ideas evolve and they transform into things that you would never imagine. One of the things that was incredibly important about this journey to this podcast, this video version of the podcast as well, is that it started in the most funniest. This version of it started in the funniest of ways. We have a meeting that we hold with the entire department almost every Monday, and to spice it up, one of our VPs said, we're going to let different people host the meeting. So when it was my turn to host the meeting, I hosted it like a radio show. And so I took a boring meeting and I turned it into something really fun and cool. And people, those now they started to ask, can I host the meeting every week? And I was like, no, I'm good. I'll wait till my turn comes back around, because we had fun.
You like
And
being in front of the camera? Like, is that something you like doing, or you like being like more the producer?
so it's funny that has changed. It's changed a lot because And when I first got to ESPN, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an on-air personality of some sort, talk show host, and it was cool. But then my whole mindset changed once I got engulfed in the company, because I realized that I wanted to change the company on several levels, and that's exactly what I did, specifically pertaining to mental health. But to finish what I was going to say, I hosted the meeting. They saw it was cool. They already had an idea brewing of they wanted to put a podcast together. And then they said, John, we want you to lead it. Like, lead us to wherever you need us to go. I was like, this is your podcast, your show. The first one went in the gate, and then they were blown away. So that proper preparation does prevent poor performance. So, and that's how the podcast got started and where it is today. Like, we have another episode coming out in a week, and it's about, we talked to the head of social, well, like one of the heads of social media for the company, and how he and his team, his partner, got it to be one of the most successful sports social media platforms in the world. And he kind of dives in as to how they do that. And it's fascinating to see people that are at the top of their game explain how they do their job. So,
I look,
that's kind of how it got started. Yeah. Say it again.
I was just saying, I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Every person I talk to, I'm genuinely interested in their story.
Right.
And that's part of why, I believe, and it's not even just me, my producer is as well. She's genuinely interested in the story, and she asks questions that are completely different than mine, which makes it work. And the core of it, yes, it's a PR podcast, but it's completely behind the scenes, and it's nothing like super scripted. I want somebody's authentic story from beginning to end. I don't want fluff. I don't want sugar on top. No, I want the raw ingredients and how it happened, in your opinion, because that's how people truly learn, with diving deep into the experience. So that's how, we got really into the podcast. But to jump back to, why I shifted from being, so focused on being an on-air talent, instead of in more of a producer, is because I created, you mentioned the Gus Galletti podcast, in which we spoke about mental health in that. The number one thing that's incredibly important to me for the company is life standpoint too, is mental health. And what my partner, Melissa Rollins, and I did was we created the first ever mental health affinity group / ERG. And if you don't know what ERG is, it's an employee resource group, a large group within the company that people with like-minded can come together to support a cause and also affect how the company works. So the first ever has never been done before. And it wasn't easy to do, but it was incredibly impactful. And the timing of it was perfect, because it happened before the pandemic, but it took flight during the pandemic, because people were looking for resources, and we had so many different offerings. But the reason why I shifted specifically from being focused in on being on air or being talent was because this was more powerful. And when it's all said and done, it's not just, what you do with your job that's important. It's about the lives that you affect. So if you're looking to do anything, it's incredibly important that you make a decision based on who you are and what you actually want to do. If being on air, being a talent, being a producer, or being, a play-by-play is what you want to do, that's perfectly fine. But also look at how you can affect, if you're going to be with somebody and around somebody or in a company, how can I affect that company on a different level? So when we came up with mental health, we put it together. We went full on in, and it changed the entire landscape of the Walt Disney Company. And I'm telling you, I got calls from the highest of the high, of people asking questions. Our president called us and saying, hey, look, this is awesome. I need you to debrief me on everything that is happening, because he started getting questions outside of the company, of people asking about it and things like that. So that's how I knew we were building traction. We had writers come in and do a story on how we created it. They thought it was really awesome and cool. So that's one of the main things that I lead for the company, on the top of other few things. And I think that is it's better to leave an impact in that way than for me specifically being an on-air personality.
That makes sense. I appreciate your passion and the love that you have for your work. And I
Thank you.
want to know, like, so on the topic of mental health, as another person of color, I want to know what advice you would give to like a person who's not comfortable in their skin or they feel like less confident because they are a person of color and they see it more as like a hindrance instead of a strength.
That's a powerful question, and it's a question that a lot of people don't want to face. If there's internal work and then there's external work to the answer to that question. The internal work is you have to spend time every day doing something that makes you feel better about yourself. Forgetting color for a second, it takes, because we're all the same color on the inside before we get to the outside. And we have to understand, if you don't love yourself, then who else has the right to do so? This is your body, this is your mind. God gave it to you first before he gave it to anybody else. Before he let anybody else sees it, it belongs to you. So if something belongs to you, you must cherish it and take care of it in a way that no one else can. And I believe wholeheartedly that you start and build a practice of loving yourself through things that you like to do. It is not you. So for example, if you like to read, you spend an hour every day reading, and that's your time for you. If you like to walk and jog or exercise, you spend time doing that because it makes you feel good. And eventually over time, what you'll see is that you will start to gain more confidence in who you are because you're doing things that empower you. And that is the goal. So to start to go beyond um, what has been said, or the thoughts in your mind, to build a stronger mental health, you must place yourself in the environment on a consistent basis that makes you feel good. That doesn't say that bad things aren't going to happen and that things aren't going to push back, but it's the consistency of showing up in a space that makes you feel comfortable. If it's praying, do that every day. May build a consistency every day. If it's hanging out with friends, see how often you can do that, and make sure that the people that you're hanging around are people that are conducive to your mental health and don't take away from it. Because just because you like to hang around them in instances doesn't mean they're good for you all the time. It's the more time you start to take to be specific and be direct about, or be intentional about your mental health, the better you start to understand the things that help it and things that diminish it, in a sense. Now, externally, you never be able to control the thoughts and the words that come out of people's mouth, but you are able to control how you react to them and what a true reality is. So when I've had racial slurs thrown at me, I've had non-racial things but disrespectful things thrown at me, and the common denominator in all of those things is I can choose how I react. I can't choose what they say. And a lot of times we get caught up in what they said and why they shouldn't say it, and our opinion on why they shouldn't say it. But to be fully honest, we can't control that. We can only control what we do. And I'm not saying to take all those hits and do nothing about it, but I'm saying you can control how you deliver your return back. You can change the circumstance. You can remove yourself. You can remove yourself from environments, and you can address things in a professional way where you're still getting a point across and say, look, first of all, you cannot say that. I will not tolerate that, and I'm not dealing with that. Second of all, you have to have respect for me as a person, because if I was a family member of yours, you wouldn't want to talk to me regardless of how close or far apart you are with your family. If we share the same bloodline, you wouldn't talk to me like that, or you wouldn't say those things, or you would jump to an A. When you start to put things in perspective where people can understand, and people can hear and understand in the way that they will be tangible to them, then they start to rethink what is what they said, how they said it, or the good or bad, or how to revamp what they're saying. But you have to say it from a place of confidence, a place of power, because when you say it in those ways, it's hard for somebody to deal with or fight somebody that's not fighting back in the way that they want them to. You give them power when you change, when you attack them in the way that they anticipate it, because people know how they say things. People know how they're acting, whether it be in anger or not. So it's important that we better ourselves in our mindset. We elevate our minds in a way to be above those that want to hit below the belt. And again, go right back to it. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. So the way I grew up in life, like you don't get disrespected and just keep going. No, we address it. We're going face to face. And there's good to that and there's bad to that. So it's, everything doesn't have to be on 100, but you have control over what you do. And it is the control that empowers you, because people can scream all day, but if you're not screaming back, you just say, are you done? Listen, I got to go. Then they look stupid. And then they're like, okay, and they can call you whatever name of the book. And I've had people call me, the N word, and turn around to them and say, you know what? Love you, bro. Be good. And I've watched them stammer and like have no clue what to say. And then the people around them is the one that gets them. Like, why would you even say that? Like, I don't know why I even hang out with you just because you got upset at this and now you saying that. Like, I didn't know you were like, and then you don't have to say a word, because now their own people, the people that they felt safe with and strong around, are questioning who they are. And that's way more powerful than you ever being able to do anything. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes I do get upset. Because it's just not right. I don't like things that aren't right. I don't like things that aren't fair. But again, I can only control what I can control.
Right. No, that makes sense. I want to shift gears for just a minute. I want to know, like, can you just go through what your job title is and just how did you get to that point? Because the point I want to make is like everybody has their own journey and everybody has a path that they go through. So I want to know what your story was and how did you get to where you are now?
So I've been with the company for about 7 years now. Before I was with the company, I was in grad school. I had I had two jobs. Well, I had a job and an internship. I call it an internship because we weren't getting paid. I was working for the New York Times, and I was a producer slash reporter. And my job was to interview the players. So we went to Shea Stadium. I interviewed Mets players. We went to Brooklyn. I went to view the Brooklyn Nets, and got to during the playoffs. I got to interview like be with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh and all those people, and it was kind of cool. NFL season, Giants and Jets, everything. Um, so that was I went so undergrad. I was in broadcast journalism, and I kind of did the on-air thing mostly, but still produced my own stuff, my own packages and stuff. Then it was from undergrad I transitioned over. So it's gonna take a couple of minutes for me to explain it, because you'll understand it when it's in increments. When I first started college, my whole mindset was to be on air and be on TV. I I started out. It wasn't planned, but it worked out in God's amazing way. I started out in college, and I think I wrote not it wasn't a paper, but it was kind of like a newsletter, my first ever one. And in the managing editor of the school newspaper, one of them came up to me and said, look, we got an opening for a sports editor. I think you can write. Do you want to write? And I was like, and then she just cut me off and was like, look, you got the job, show up tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, I don't really, whatever. That day I heard Stephen A. Smith say on the air, he said, look, if anybody's looking to get into the industry or stay in the industry, here's one rule that you must live by. If you don't know everything, you don't know anything. And what he explained was, you need to have an understanding or a grasp of everything you want to do around the number one thing you want to do, if you want to get further, if you want to be successful, because it doesn't serve you any purpose. Well, not at the time he said this, but I knew what he meant. To just understand one part of the major scope of what you want to do. So I wanted to be in media. So I wanted to understand. I took that as, you need to understand mostly or every aspect of the area where you want to exist in, and then you can choose what specifically you're really good at. So I was a sports editor, and I was good at it, but I got to a point where I didn't like having to all my work scrutinized, and hey, you got to take this out because of this politics here. And it wasn't so bad. Let me not act like the government was coming for us. It was a college newspaper. But at the end of the day, it was too aggravating. After a while, it was way too aggravating for me. And, you know, I went, I think she was the entertainment editor. She had a radio show called The Spectrum. Shout out to Amy. She was awesome. And she came to me one day while we were preparing the final version of the paper. And she goes, you can really talk. Like, you have a captivating way you talk. I want to interview you on my show. And I'm like, what show? And she's like, I got a radio show. I'm like, really? I didn't know that existed. I long I went on the show, and first episode when she interviewed me was cool. And she said, look, this show is going to be yours. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we had fun. That was dope. Why are you handing me your work? That's literally what I said. She goes, no. She's like, I need you back because I've never got callers like that. I've never, like, you know how to talk to an audience. And I was like, okay, cool. Can my boy come with me? Because we all had a great conversation. And she was like, yeah, sure. It turned out to be the three of us for, like, I think we did that for a year until she was like, look, I'm graduating. Take the show to wherever you want it to go. So now I was a sports editor. Then I transitioned over to a radio host. And from the radio host, it was really cool. We interviewed a lot of people. We had people call in. We had music and stuff go on. It was really dope. And we had a lot of people come in, and people actually started listening to it and tuning into it throughout campus and realizing that, like, hey, like, yo, that show is dope. When can I get on? Asking that. They always ask that. And then from there, I was, because I was getting good at radio, they were putting together, the media department was putting together a team to do radio broadcasts of the school games. And I'm a sports guy through and through. So I said automatically, I stuck my hand up in the air, like, let me do color commentating because, I wanted to do play-by-play at first, but then it was just like, the guy that was doing it, he was really good. And he was more so a stickler. He didn't know much about basketball, but he knew how to deliver information in a compelling way. And I knew how to explain what he was delivering. And so we worked the tandem, and I think it started off around 5 or 6 of us, but my passion for it just kept going because I do this all the time. I talk about and comment on sports all the time. So I went from being a radio host to a color commentator, and we traveled all over New York, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn. Like, we were already in Brooklyn, but like, we all over doing the radio broadcast. And I was interviewing players, and for the longest time, people just, when everybody tells you, like, yeah, this is what you should do, you're really good at that. You hear them, but it's like, yeah, but yeah, I don't know where else to go after this. It's nobody, in my opinion, I love my team and my school, but it's D3. So I was like, ain't nobody looking at that. You guys probably think it's nice now because it's cool, but I was kind of selling myself short. And from there, literally, like, the stuff ended. I went into grad school. I worked my butt off. I had 5 classes in grad school and still had a job. And one day my professor tapped me on the shoulder on the way to class. And he goes, do you know who LeBron James is? And I was like, what kind of question is that? Of course I know who LeBron James is. Why are you asking me? He's like, do you know football? I'm like, yes, I know football. I'm the one that teaches you about football. He's like, okay, good. Tomorrow we're going here. We're going to meet with this person. Name is Bill Roden. And he's, we're going to hang out, and he wants to do, he's a student of mine, and he wants to shoot some things. He's putting together a team. And I'm like, sign me up. Sure. I'll do it. I had no clue what was happening. Had no clue what was coming. We sat in the first meeting, and he, said, what we were going to do. And I kind of was like, that sounds right. But I don't, like, really, we're going to get credentialed to go to, a Mets game and sit down and interview players. And lo and behold, he's like, make sure you got a suit, or make sure you got a shirt and a tie and some slacks and some nice shoes, because we're going into the press box. When he handed me my first credential to a Mets game, my eyes almost came out of my head. And I was like texting everybody, like, I'm going to a Mets game for free. Like, up until this point, I'm a New Yorker. You're paying for everything. There's like, I didn't understand the difference between that world and how to get there. I got there, and my mind was just blown. And he pulls me to the side, and he says this, and I'll never forget it. He goes, you have 60 seconds. And I'm like, 60 seconds for what? He goes, you get 60 seconds to be starstruck, and then you can never do it again. And I was like, okay. And I understood. And I didn't take up the 60 seconds because in my head, I'm like, no, it's game time. You can't be a fan. And don't get it twisted. I'm seeing stars that I watched on TV like 10 minutes ago. And I'm just like, oh, shoot. In my head, I'm like, wow, that's that person. That's dope. All right. What do I have to do? And it's from that moment on, he taught me my first lesson on professionalism. And when we first got there, we got shoved aside and we got pushed all over the place because literally at points, because we were the youngest in every single press box, the absolute youngest to do it on a consistent basis. Like we went through a season showing up, and every single day, even when I would try to ask a question, they were like, whose kid is this? And then they would talk over me until one day I said, no, 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 you're not going to do that. And I told my camera, my lead photographer, I was like, look, I need you to hold on to the back of my shirt. She's like, what? I'm like, hold on to the back of my shirt. I'm bulldozing my way to the front. And she's like, you can't do that. I said, what are they going to do? Kick us out? And they were like, to this point, they had designated me the person to talk to anybody. They didn't want to talk to anybody. So my guy Dan, he was the editing producer. Like, so he would edit everything after we shot it. Raisa she was the person that shot everything, and I was the guy that asked the questions when Bill couldn't. So she holds on, and Dan holds on to her. And I literally just dragged them. I said, excuse me, boom. And I've just moved people out the way. I worked out a lot. So when people see me coming, they're just like, oh, okay, what are we going to really do with this guy? And they're old, and they're varying ranges. But the guys that have been there for like 20 years doing their job in the press box, they were kind of looking like, who is this? And I just went to say, hey, listen. What about blah, 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 blah? And everybody shut up. And I was like, oh, shoot, it does work. And he turned to me and it was so like, this was past the Mets game. The Mets game was the first ever one where we finally came into our own. It was actually a Brooklyn Nets game. And they were like it's towards the end of the season. And I just bulldozed my way up. And I believe at the time it was Joe Johnson. And I literally just, Joe, what about blah, 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 blah. And everybody just turned like, they're here again. Whose kids are these? And he like turns and he answers the question, but he had seen me. So he's like, yeah, and we're having a back and forth. And then I asked him a follow-up question really quick, because that's the name of the game when 40 other reporters are around you. And they're just like going at it. They're just taking up everything. And he and I are having a conversation. And one reporter kind of just tapped me. He was like, just keep going. And I'm just like, well, what about blah, 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 blah? And it's not like I'm holding back my questions or how I feel or whatever. I'm asking him very somewhat can call it tough questions about a loss they just took. But I asked it in a way that's not disrespectful. And he's going back and forth. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And I turn around and walk away. And one of the veterans, the senior guys in the press room, goes up to Bill. He didn't come up to us. He went up to Bill. He goes, that team of youngins you got over there, they're pretty fierce. Like, that's not bad. And that's when we knew we had arrived. Because regardless, after that point, every single press box we went into, we started seeing the same people. And they started seeing, oh, the kids are here. And they're like joking around with us or whatever. And I was like, yeah, until you want me to drag you to the front, because it's like, yeah, shh, don't tell anybody that. And they started joking around and playing with us, but they gave us respect. That was the number one thing. They gave us respect. And that is part of like the reason why, we pushed the way we did. But fast forward, I didn't have a job out of college. When I graduated, I was the only one. A couple of the team members went to Pittsburgh, went to California, went back to Chicago, and they had jobs and they had things lined up, and I was the only one. We had our last team dinner, and Bill goes, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And I was like, looking for jobs, same thing I was doing the day before. And he goes, wear a suit, show up to the Marriott in Manhattan. I'm doing an interview, and I want to introduce you to some people. I wear a suit, I show up, I don't have a credential. It's actually the Name It conference in Manhattan. and I had no credential. I was terrified. In fact, I ran past security and went up to the bathroom to hide. That's literally what I did. I hid in the bathroom because I was terrified. I thought I was going to get kicked out. True story. I walked out and said, look, the first door I see, I'm going to walk straight in and hope that he's there. I had no clue where he was. I went in there, I sat down, and I went in there. As soon as I went in there, he was sitting in the back, and I just went down and sat back next to him and said, God, thank you. I found this man, because if I went into the wrong room, I didn't know what was happening. Turns out he was interviewing the former president of ESPN, John Skipper, at the conference, talking about diversity and inclusion. And after it's over, he yells to the back. I'm holding his stuff because I'm like, I'm just happy to be there. Like, so I'm holding his stuff. And he's like, and he goes, hey, John, I have some people I want you to meet. Come up to the front. He literally screams that to the back of the room. And everybody who's online to meet how I'm basically skipping the line. It's like a line of 20 people that are trying to get up there and talk and have their 30 seconds of a moment with the executives or whatever. And I literally just drag his stuff all the way to the front, and everybody's looking like, who is this dude and why does he get to go to the front before us? And up until this point, I joke with Bill all the time. I didn't think he liked me that much. What I didn't tell you was I was relentless when it came. I got so in love with being in the press box and the adrenaline of fighting against people to get a spot, to get a question in. I asked him about it every single week. And we went through a whole season, and he just to the point like, oh my goodness, John, no, we cannot do this. We don't have we don't need the story. And I'm like, do you need anything else? So I thought he hated me because I was such a nag. I was very persistent. And so I get to the front. I've never heard him talk like this. He basically just tells my boss now, Chris LaPlaca, my senior VP, like the guy you saw on the podcast, he tells that same guy before he even knew who I was, look, John, let me tell you something about John. He's the most tenacious producer and reporter that you're going to have. If you don't grab him, you're going to miss out. And my jaw like dropped to the floor because I never heard him talk like that. Never even knew he thought about me like that. And he did the same thing to the senior vice president of HR, who's now the senior vice president over all of Disney's HR representative over all of Disney. And then he went to John Skipper and said the same thing. I didn't have a job for 7 months, but they had me come up to ESPN. They showed me around and was like, look, we don't have anything yet, but we want you a part of our team. And I was like, oh, okay. I've never been courted before. So it was kind of cool. 7 months later, they say, look, we created this position here. We want you to apply for it. No, I learned later, it was never posted. It was specifically designed. They sent it to me directly. And day one, they go, look, hey, we have a meeting, the Monday morning meeting I told you about earlier. This is a meeting of like 50 to 60 people. You're going to introduce yourself. And then after that, you have to cut a highlight for SportsCenter. And I was like, already? Like, okay. In my head, I was like, already? Like, dang, like introduction work. I was all for it. But it was like getting drafted to the NBA, because where I'm from, there's nobody that says, hey, I got, either you got drafted literally to a league or you got a regular job. Nobody gets to ESPN or anything like that. So when I told the family that I would work for ESPN now, day one, and I posted it on Facebook, like when I tell you I got the most messages I've ever gotten in my life, like, and what I didn't tell you was, as a kid, I was obsessed with ESPN. And everybody know me as the guy that you're going to end up at ESPN. Through college, you're obviously going to end up, because that's where I'm telling everybody since I was 8 years old that I'm going to play basketball, I'm going to get drafted, and then when I finish my career, I'm going to go talk for ESPN. Obviously, I didn't get drafted, but I just definitely got drafted by ESPN. So that's the story and how the increments, and I think it's important to say the increments because I want everybody to understand that it just didn't happen overnight. I didn't just wake up and then they said, yes, I applied for a job. No, it didn't go like that way. I applied for jobs that I weren't even qualified for, because they first told me, just get into the company and we can snatch you from anywhere else as long as you're in the company. And that opportunity never came, because I spent 7 months with nothing, no job, no income, just with my family. and just holding out. And I applied to NBC and all those CBS, CNN, all those other places. New York One, you could name it. I applied for it, but I believe God had this specific thing for me, and I will never change that notion, because when you hear the story, it has to be that. It had to be that way. They created a position out of nowhere and didn't offer it to anybody else. So it's and when I think about it, everybody else's story, I've never found somebody's story that was like mine.